Hey there, this is Mr. Icarus, and welcome to yet another edition of Doom Mod Madness. This time round, we're checking out a little something by the name of Maskim Xul. At least I hope that's how you're supposed to pronounce it, because I ain't got no clue. It's a strange-looking word when you see it spelled out. But anyway, this is a collection of maps, first of which taking place in a tech base with amusingly broken switches, before taking you on a journey into more, let's say, Lovecraftian territory. But one of the more interesting things about this opening section here is that it's pretty much devoid of enemies. The only real thing you'll be contending with are lasers, really. As far as first impressions go, this is certainly an intro that colored me intrigued. The tone of it all implied that something tense was indeed going on, but there was no idea for me to tell exactly what, other than, not getting hit in the face by lasers. It's certainly a bold decision to have an opening such as this where the player doesn't really get their hands on anything with which they can defend themselves. You can't fight back against those turrets, all you can do is dodge, and it does plant that seed in the back of your head where you're thinking, well, what happens if I do end up in a situation where I have to defend myself? And it's a nice method of building some kind of tension. That said, it's not very long before you leave the familiar environments of the tech base behind and find yourself in environments decidedly more constructed of wood. This is where you'll spend the meat of your time within Maskim Xul, and it starts off very creepy indeed. The change in soundtrack definitely cools you down a bit after the frantic running around that you might have done during the prologue, and the opening section keeps up the pretense of keeping you relatively unarmed, something that does keep that sense of unease rising. You're constantly thinking, this is all great and everything, but when am I going to get my hands on a gun? As it turns out, you don't really have to wait that long at all, and rather than just getting your hands on one humble pistol, you get your hands on two for a little bit of dual-wielding action. It's certainly an effective relief to all of the tension that has built up so far during the course of Maskim Xul, but truly, this is where the trials of Maskim Xul really begin. Now, I feel it's important to state that this is not my first run-through of Maskim Xul. Well, it's certainly my first successful attempt. I've tried multiple times in the past to get into this collection of maps, and at various points I've fallen foul of various kinds of frustration, prompting me to move on to more immediately entertaining maps. But the recent revelation that this was the recipient of a Cacoward has prompted me to come back to it and give it the old college try. And I think I've come to an inescapable conclusion when it comes to me and Maskim Xul. I think I hate it. Now, I know hate is a strong word and everything, but I can't really think of any other way to describe how I felt when I was finally over and done with Maskim Xul, because as interesting as it is to begin with, it starts to do a lot of things that just rapidly erode that goodwill it built up in its, say, opening half hour, 45 minutes, because overall this took me about 3+ hours to actually complete, and most of that time was spent in this particular map right here. Convoluted doesn't even begin to describe it. It reaches a level of complexity creep that just begins to drive you insane, and the more I think about it, the more I consider that may have actually been the point. But even then, I would be hard-pressed to say that I found it a enjoyable experience. In fact, my enjoyment unfortunately seemed to diminish the longer I spent within it. Now, don't take this to mean that I think Maskim Xul is comprehensively awful through and through. That's not true. There are elements to this that are admittedly impressive. It's hard not to look at the overall layout and construction of Maskim Xul and not be impressed. It is certainly one heck of a creation. The trouble is, this is a creation that is a little bit too big for its own boots. I used a phrase earlier complexity creep, and it's a phrase I think of when a map gets harder and harder to read and understand the further you get into it. And in this case, this part of Maskim Xul requires the use of 3 different skull keys, 3 different crystal keys, and a whole host of switches. And the way that this map is constructed means that you're not going in a linear fashion from section to section. Quite often you'll be doubling back, revisiting and crossing over previously visited sections in order to get to where you actually need to go next. Quite frankly, it is dizzying, disorientating, and frustrating. That's the real crucial takeaway here. It becomes less of a thrill and more of an annoyance, where you're spending unnecessary time just literally running in circles going, where do you want me to go? Just give me a few more breadcrumbs. Anything, please. There is a positive example of being dizzied and disorientated within Maskim Xul, though. There's this isolated section that I actually think's really neat. You wander in, you hit a switch on the wall, and boom, you have flipped the room. And it forms the basis for this interesting little puzzle segment. There's no enemies to deal with. Instead, it's up to you to figure out how best to rotate and navigate this environment to reach the other end and deal with whatever nasty thing is lurking there. It's certainly one of the sections of Maskim Xul I remember a hell of a lot more fondly. I do recall it actually being a section that got me quite frustrated the first few attempts, but that was largely down to it making me feel dumb because, you know, the whole point of a puzzle is you've got to work for the solution, and it really is a section that relies on your powers of observation. Another section that I've come around to thinking was actually pretty neat was this one right here, which is technically a secret. You run around the level of Maskim Xul, activating various symbols that some of you may recognize from the Binding of Isaac, and it allows you to access the spellbook, which essentially functions like a BFG in terms of effect on the enemies. The only kicker being that every time you use it, it does in fact damage you. And this section does continue on for some time. It's essentially a test of worthiness. Those enemies spawn in increasing numbers and increasing variety, and you've got to intelligently manage your use of the book alongside the medkits that are scattered throughout the arena here. What I didn't figure out, however, and something that did cause me a little bit of annoyance, was that once you've carved yourself enough of a path through these, it is entirely possible to get out of this section early, but yeah, that's something you can only really do once you make enough of a hole to actually reach all the way down to the opposite side. But yeah, at the time, kind of frustrating. In retrospect, actually kind of neat. If I had to pinpoint the singular moment in Maskim Xul where it comprehensively broke me, I would say that it would be this section right here. And on the surface of things, it doesn't really look like all that big of a deal. It's a gap, you can cross it, you can easily get across from this side to that side without any problem whatsoever, but the other side requires a bit of advanced maneuvering, and my real bugbear with this is it's just annoying and wide enough to convince you that it's not doable. Jumping is disabled, by the way, and you don't have quite enough of a run-up to give you the momentum you need to cross it through conventional means. Instead, you've got to rely on a little bit of strafe jumping. Now, for those of you that don't know, strafe jumping is a technique of movement you can use to give yourself more momentum and allow you to cross bigger than normal gaps. It's something I would call an advanced technique because it's something you very seldom have to employ in the course of, well, any map in particular, really. It's not really something that should be included in a map if you're seeking to keep it accessible, because it's very much an optional choice. There's a variety of ways you could make that jump more doable for the average Joe, and such methods include maybe putting a kicker, a little bit of an elevated step at the edge for you to be able to cross the gap without employing such techniques. But no, there it was. I wasted a metric crap ton of time attempting to do it over and over and over and over, getting angrier and angrier and angrier every time. And I eventually figured it out. I eventually did it myself. It took a lot of practice, it took a lot of time, and I finally got into the section of level that I wanted to get in. And you know what was waiting for me? A goddamn ambush. You can see how much health I have right now. I didn't take it very well. You could say from that point onwards, I was just in a state of perpetual annoyance. Anything from that point onwards was just an additional kick to the nethers, and one of the bigger ones was the realization that after having located the exit to the map I was on, I still had yet another map to get through. Granted, it wasn't anywhere near as complex as what I'd been dealing with, but oh my giddy Aunt Nora riding on a unicycle backwards, did they up the bullshit. How exactly did they up the bullshit? Archviles. Archviles. How many Archviles? Too many Archviles. Look at all them Archviles. That's too many Archviles. That is far too many Archviles. If anything denotes a bullshit quantity of Archviles, I'd say Maskim Xul fulfills it. And the thing is, Archviles weren't exempt from the previous map. They were very much present. They were present in an ever-increasing variety towards the end of it, and I'd thought happily that I'd escaped that bullshit when I left that map. But no, it's bullshit piled upon bullshit piled upon bullshit, and oh god, my will to live just evaporated with the advent and realization of what I had to get through in this room. Oh yeah, there's a boss at the end. I didn't care though. I was beyond the point of caring. I was comprehensively beyond giving a single iota of a shit at this particular point in time. I was just in it to see it done, really. I just wanted to scratch it off the list, to put a tick next to the entry that said, yes, I had played Maskim Xul, and yes, I had made a video about it. So here you go. Official, incontrovertible proof that I tried. God, I tried. So, on that bombshell, would I recommend you play... I'm sorry, I can't finish that sentence. I can't finish that sentence. Yes, by all means, play Maskim Xul if you enjoy the sensation of being kicked repeatedly in the testicles for a period up to and including 3 hours of your precious time. Because that's how long it took me. So yeah, consider yourself warned. And if that still doesn't deter you, the link, as usual, is in the description below. While I'm at it, I'd like to give a great big thank you to my wonderful patrons over on Patreon. Thank you so very, very much for supporting the channel and for making painful videos like this very much possible. If you're interested in lending a hand yourself, maybe you'd like to see your name in the credits, maybe you'd like to gain access to early editions of my videos before everyone else. If that's the case, you can find a link to my Patreon page also in the description below. Hopefully you've enjoyed this video. Feel free to let me know what you thought in the comments, and feel free to suggest any mods you'd like to see me cover in future editions of Doom Mod Madness. This has been Mr. Icarus. Thank you very much for watching. Icarus out.